The world had changed. What was once a bustling, thriving society was now reduced to a shell of its former self. People walked the streets, eyes downcast, faces hidden behind masks, both literal and figurative. The virus that had spread across the globe didn't just turn people into mindless zombies, it fractured the very core of what it meant to be human. Every interaction was clouded with suspicion. No one knew who they could trust anymore, and everyone had secrets. In a world where survival had become the highest priority, humanity's most precious traits, compassion, empathy, and trust, seemed to be slipping away. At the center of it all stood Emily, a young woman who had lost everything. Her family was gone, consumed by the virus. The life she once knew, filled with hope and optimism, had been shattered in an instant. Now, her days were filled with nothing but survival, finding food, avoiding the infected, and desperately searching for any sign of a safe haven. She had become accustomed to the routine of solitude, the constant vigilance required to stay alive. But there was something different about Emily. While most survivors had retreated into themselves, choosing isolation as their form of protection, Emily still clung to the last remnants of her humanity. She helped those she encountered, offered whatever little she had, and refused to let the darkness consume her soul. But in a world ruled by fear, this kindness had become a dangerous liability. As Emily made her way through the crumbling remnants of a once bustling city, the streets were eerily silent. The decay of civilization was everywhere, buildings half collapsed, windows boarded up, and remnants of long-abandoned lives scattered across the ground. A faint breeze stirred the dry leaves at her feet, carrying with it the faint scent of rot. In the distance, the groaning moans of the infected could be heard, a chilling reminder that the nightmare was far from over. She had learned to live with the constant threat of the undead. They were never far, always lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. It was a brutal existence, but Emily had become hardened to it. The fear that once gripped her heart had dulled over time, replaced by a cold, calculated determination to survive. But even as she moved forward, there was an unease gnawing at her. She had heard whispers of a new danger on the horizon, something worse than the virus, something more insidious than the undead. People had begun to talk about the Masked Ones, a mysterious group of survivors who wore faceless, blank masks. They had become a symbol of fear and suspicion, their motives unclear, their actions unpredictable. Some said they were no different from the infected, hiding behind their masks to carry out unspeakable horrors. Emily had heard enough to know that she needed to be cautious. She couldn't afford to trust anyone, not even those who seemed to be like her, survivors trying to hold on to what remained of their humanity. In this new world, it wasn't just the zombies you had to fear, it was the people, too. Her journey had taken her to this forgotten part of the city, an area that had once been full of life but was now abandoned. She had heard rumors of a safe zone nearby, a place where survivors had gathered to rebuild, to find some semblance of normalcy. But it seemed too good to be true, and Emily was skeptical. She had seen many such promises fall apart, the hope of safety quickly dissolving into betrayal and bloodshed. As she moved deeper into the ruins, her instincts sharpened. There was something off about this place, a sense that she wasn't alone. The silence was too complete, the stillness too unnatural. She paused, her breath catching in her throat, her hand instinctively reaching for the weapon she carried, an old, battered knife. Then, a sound, a whisper, reached her ears. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She froze, straining to hear. The voice was muffled, coming from behind a pile of rubble. Her heart raced. The fear that had been dormant for so long began to creep back into her chest. Taking slow, measured steps, Emily approached the source of the sound. Her mind raced with possibilities. It could be another survivor, or it could be one of the infected, pretending to be human. She had learned to never take chances, to never let her guard down. The world was full of predators, and you could never tell who they were until it was too late. As she rounded the corner, she saw him, his face obscured by a mask, the very same kind she had heard so much about. His stance was calm, almost relaxed, as though the chaos around him didn't faze him in the slightest. Emily's pulse quickened. Who was this man? Was he friend or foe? "Are you lost?" the masked figure asked, his voice eerily calm. The question sent a chill down Emily's spine. She couldn't afford to trust him. Not here. Not now. She tightened her grip on her knife, eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" The man tilted his head slightly, as if studying her. "I could ask you the same thing." It was a simple exchange, but the tension between them was palpable. Behind the mask, there was no way to tell if he was friend or foe. No way to see if the humanity she still clung to was still present beneath his cold exterior. In this world, where survival was all that mattered, the question of who was truly human had become more complicated than ever before. And Emily, standing at the precipice of a new and terrifying reality, would soon learn just how dangerous it could be to trust someone, anyone, in a world where everyone wore a mask. Emily's eyes never left the stranger's mask. It was a featureless, white porcelain face, cracked and weathered by time, but its smooth surface gave away nothing. No emotion, no hint of humanity. The mask felt like a barrier, something designed to hide the truth beneath. It was unnerving. A mask had become a symbol of something far worse in this post-apocalyptic world, something cold and calculating. "I'm not lost," Emily replied, her voice steady, though her heart raced. She kept her distance, her hand still on her knife. She couldn't afford to show any vulnerability. She had learned the hard way that kindness and trust were luxuries no longer afforded in this world. The masked figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his head slightly, as though contemplating her words. The stillness between them stretched on for a long, uncomfortable moment, broken only by the distant moans of the undead. Emily's mind raced. Was this stranger just another survivor, like her, trying to survive? Or was he something more sinister, one of the masked ones she had heard rumors about, people who concealed their true intentions behind faceless coverings? The man shifted, taking a step closer, his movements deliberate but slow, as if testing the waters. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his voice low, almost too calm. "The infected are getting more aggressive. And it's not just them you need to worry about. There are other things in this city, things that will break you long before the zombies ever do." Emily's grip tightened around her knife, but she remained still. His words weren't entirely new. She had seen the worst of humanity, had felt the sting of betrayal more times than she cared to remember. In a world where survival trumped all, there was no room for trust. Not anymore. The only thing that mattered was keeping her own skin intact. "I don't need your help," she said firmly, though her stomach twisted with uncertainty. There was something about this man, something unnerving in his presence, in the way he spoke, that made her feel like she was playing a dangerous game by even engaging with him. The masked man's lips quirked into a semblance of a smile, though it was hard to tell through the mask. "Help isn't always given, Emily. Sometimes it's a choice. You'll have to decide if you want to make it." His use of her name sent a jolt through her. How did he know her name? She hadn't told him anything about herself. Could he be stalking her? Or was this something more? Her pulse quickened, but she masked the reaction, refusing to let him see her fear. "Who are you?" she asked again, her voice more insistent this time. "And how do you know my name?" The stranger tilted his head again, as though considering the question. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought, as though deciding how much of the truth to reveal. Emily's senses were on high alert. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to stay on guard, to trust no one. But there was something that drew her in, despite her better judgment. "I know more than you think, Emily. I know that you've been trying to find a safe place. I know you've been running from the infection and from the very people who should be protecting you. I know that you're lost, but you don't want to admit it." The masked figure stepped closer again, his voice low, almost hypnotic. "I can offer you a way out. But you have to make a choice." A sense of dread washed over Emily. She stepped back, eyes scanning his every movement. This wasn't a normal encounter. People didn't just offer help like this, especially not in a world where everyone was out for themselves. No one helped without expecting something in return. "I'm not interested in your offer," Emily said, taking another step back, her instincts screaming at her to get away from this stranger. But the man wasn't fazed. "Of course you're not. But you will be, when you realize that there's nowhere left to run. You'll need allies. People who understand the world you're trying to survive in. You'll need people who aren't afraid to wear the mask." His last words lingered in the air, like a shadow creeping just out of reach. The mask. The symbol of fear and anonymity. What did he mean by that? Was he suggesting that hiding who you were was the only way to survive this new world? Emily's thoughts spun in circles. The more she tried to push him away, the more he seemed to entrench himself in her mind. It wasn't just his presence that unnerved her, it was the way he spoke, with such certainty, as though he knew what would happen next in her life, as though he could see the path she was on and where it would lead. She had no choice but to be careful. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. "I don't need you," Emily said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension between them. She turned to leave, but the masked man spoke one last time, his voice sharp like a blade. "Remember this, Emily. Everyone wears a mask. The only difference is whether or not you choose to hide behind it." The words hit her like a punch to the gut, leaving her frozen in place for a moment before she forced herself to move. Her footsteps echoed in the empty street, but the weight of the stranger's words lingered, filling the silence with a deep sense of unease. What was he trying to tell her? What had she just walked away from? One thing was certain, the world had changed, and so had the people in it. But the question remained, who was still truly human in this masked, broken world? Emily's heart pounded as she hurried through the ruins of the city, her mind racing with the masked man's cryptic words. The streets had become increasingly treacherous, the once familiar path now twisted by destruction and chaos. The absence of any sign of life, save for the distant groans of the infected, only amplified the unnerving silence that seemed to hang in the air. Her footsteps quickened as she moved deeper into the decaying landscape, her thoughts consumed by the masked stranger's offer. Could she trust anyone in this world anymore? He had given her a glimpse of something she hadn't allowed herself to think about, a way out of this nightmare. But at what cost? The question gnawed at her, and she pushed the thought aside as she focused on surviving. Trusting anyone, especially in a world so fractured, could be her undoing. She had seen too many examples of people who had used others for their own gain, who had taken what they needed and discarded the rest. Humanity, it seemed, had devolved into something unrecognizable. Emily's grip tightened on the worn knife at her side, a tool she had come to rely on more than anything. It was an extension of herself now, a lifeline in a world where every encounter could be life or death. She knew she couldn't afford to let her guard down, not for a moment. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. A sense of being watched, of unseen eyes on her, crawled up her spine. She stopped, holding her breath, listening for any sound that would explain the feeling. Her gaze swept over the abandoned buildings and dark alleys, but there was nothing. Just shadows, emptiness, and the lingering scent of decay. And then, she heard it. A soft shuffle, almost imperceptible, behind her. Emily spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. The streets were still empty, no sign of movement. But her instincts told her something was wrong. She backed into an alley, pressing herself against the crumbling wall, her knife ready, her eyes darting for any sign of danger. The shuffle grew louder, closer. And then, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man, dressed in ragged clothes, his face obscured by a tattered cloth. He moved with an unsettling precision, his movements deliberate, as if he knew exactly where she would be. He was unarmed, but his presence felt threatening nonetheless. "You shouldn't have come here," the man said, his voice low and raspy. Emily's grip tightened on the knife. "Who are you?" The man stepped closer, but not enough to pose an immediate threat. He was tall, thin, his eyes shadowed by the cloth. His features were hidden, his face as obscured as the masked figures. He was a reminder that in this new world, everyone had something to hide. "I'm someone who knows what's coming," he replied cryptically. "You think the zombies are the only threat? They're not. There's something worse out here. Something you can't see until it's too late." Emily's mind raced, the uncertainty of her situation weighing on her. The masked man had mentioned something similar, about the dangers beyond the infected. Was this stranger another member of the group he had warned her about? Were they connected? Or was this just another random encounter, one that would leave her more vulnerable than before? "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice laced with frustration. The man's eyes flickered, a brief flash of something, recognition, perhaps, before he lowered his gaze. "It's not about the zombies," he muttered, almost to himself. "They're just the first wave. There's something else behind it all. Something darker. And it's already here." Emily's pulse quickened. "What do you mean, something darker?" The man hesitated, his lips pressing into a thin line as though weighing the decision to speak. Finally, he looked up at her, his eyes filled with a quiet urgency. "The infection, it's not just biological. It's psychological too. There's a force out there, using fear, controlling people. You've seen it, haven't you? The way everyone is afraid, the way people change when they're desperate. They stop seeing each other as human beings." Emily's mind spun as his words sank in. She had seen it, of course. The fear that had twisted people's lives into nightmares. The paranoia, the backstabbing, the cruelty. In a world where survival was everything, humanity's true nature had begun to unravel. But the stranger's words sent a chill down her spine. What was he implying? That the infection wasn't just turning people into monsters on the outside, but was altering their very minds, controlling them? "Who's controlling them?" she asked, her voice a whisper, as though speaking the question out loud would make it all the more real. The man shook his head slowly, his gaze flicking nervously over his shoulder. "I don't know. But it's not the virus. It's something worse. Something that uses fear, uses the chaos to turn people against each other. And you're already part of it. You can feel it, can't you? The way your heart races, the way your mind keeps running, the way you can't trust anyone." Emily felt a chill run through her, an uncomfortable truth taking root in her chest. She had been so focused on surviving, on the infected, on finding safety, that she hadn't allowed herself to consider what was happening to the people around her. How the breakdown of society was not just physical, but mental. How fear had seeped into every corner of their lives, transforming even the most innocent people into something unrecognizable. "I don't believe you," Emily said, though her voice trembled slightly. She took a step back, eyes narrowing as she tried to make sense of this new danger. "You're just another paranoid survivor." The man smiled, but it wasn't a comforting expression. It was knowing, as though he saw through her defenses. "I don't expect you to believe me now," he said softly. "But you will. You'll see it for yourself soon enough." Before she could respond, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, his figure swallowed by the dark alley. Emily stood frozen for a long moment, her breath shallow, her mind racing. Was he right? Was there something far worse than the zombies waiting in the wings? Something that could tear apart what little humanity remained in this world? She didn't know, but one thing was certain: the world she was fighting to survive in had become a place where the enemy was not just the undead, but the very fear that was slowly consuming everyone around her. And it was growing stronger. The days blurred together as Emily continued her journey through the desolate city. Every step she took was laden with uncertainty, every corner hiding another danger. The stranger's warning echoed in her mind, something darker. It wasn't just the zombies she needed to fear anymore, it was the invisible force that seemed to infect the very hearts of the survivors. Was it truly something psychological, a collective descent into madness brought on by the chaos? Her hand tightened around the hilt of her knife as she navigated the cracked, overgrown streets, the once bustling city now a hollow shell of its former self. The buildings, long abandoned, loomed overhead like silent sentinels, their shattered windows offering glimpses into the past, now lost to the relentless march of time. Yet, in the silence, Emily felt something, an unease that gnawed at her from within. The man in the cloth had spoken of fear as a weapon. Fear that could manipulate, control, and twist people into something unrecognizable. Could it be true? Could the infection have evolved, No longer just a biological plague, but a psychological one? Had fear truly taken root in the minds of the survivors, creating an environment where humanity itself was unraveling? Everywhere she went, Emily saw signs of this decay. A once strong man, now reduced to a shell of his former self, skittered away from her, eyes wide with terror, as if the mere sight of her was enough to send him into a frenzy. A group of survivors huddled together, whispering in hushed voices, casting wary glances at the world around them, as though expecting something to leap from the shadows at any moment. But it wasn't the infected she needed to worry about the most. It was the people. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She had survived this far by trusting no one, by maintaining a razor-sharp focus on her own survival. But now, she realized, it wasn't just the dead she had to avoid. The living were more dangerous than ever. She hadn't heard the footsteps at first. But as she turned a corner, she came face to face with a woman, her wild eyes wide with fear. She wore a dirty, torn coat, her hair matted with grime. But it wasn't her appearance that made Emily pause, it was the look in her eyes. It was the same look Emily had seen in countless others who had lost everything to the outbreak. The same desperate, hollow stare. The woman's gaze darted nervously around them, as though checking for any unseen threat. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice trembling with anxiety. "It's not safe. You have to leave. It's already too late." Emily's grip tightened on her knife. She wasn't sure if the woman was a threat or just another broken soul. "What are you talking about?" Emily asked, her voice cautious. The woman's gaze flickered nervously toward the shadows, as though she expected something to leap from them. "They're coming. They're all coming. They know who you are. They know what you've done." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Who knows?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though a sense of dread was beginning to take root. The woman's eyes widened with a new kind of panic. "The ones who hide behind the masks. They've been watching. They see everything." She glanced at Emily, her voice dropping to a fearful whisper. "You can't outrun them. You can't hide from them." Emily's blood ran cold at the mention of the masked figures. Was this what the man in the cloth had been warning her about? Were these people behind the strange, manipulative force he had spoken of? Before Emily could respond, the woman let out a strangled cry, her body jerking with fear as if something unseen had triggered a response deep inside her. She spun away from Emily, bolting down the street in a blind panic, her footsteps heavy with desperation. Her breath came in ragged gasps, as though the very air around her had turned poisonous. Emily didn't follow. She knew better than to chase after a frightened, unpredictable person in this world. Her instincts screamed at her to stay put, to assess the situation carefully. A noise caught her attention, something too soft to be a breeze. A rustling sound, like someone, or something, was moving just beyond the corner. Slowly, Emily crept forward, her knife raised, her senses on high alert. Every shadow seemed to shift, every creak of the building around her felt like a warning. Her pulse quickened as she turned the corner, only to find nothing. The alleyway was empty. For a moment, she was frozen, caught between the urge to retreat and the need to understand what was happening. Was it just paranoia? Or was the world closing in on her? The fear she had witnessed in the woman's eyes was now crawling up her spine, sinking deep into her bones. Something was watching her. Someone, was controlling the fear, using it to manipulate the survivors. Emily didn't know what kind of force was at work here, but she couldn't ignore the signs anymore. She needed answers. Her fingers tightened around her knife, the only comfort in this world that felt increasingly alien. The rules of survival had changed. It wasn't just the infected. It wasn't just the threats outside. It was the threat that festered within people, the fear that could turn them against one another, the distrust that ran deeper than any physical wound. But how could she fight something like that? How could she fight a battle against fear itself? The answers were still out of reach, but Emily was determined to find them. Because if the world had truly changed that much, if fear was the real enemy now, then the true test of survival would be to stay human in a world that was hell-bent on making everyone forget what that meant. With her resolve hardening, Emily stepped forward into the shadows, ready to confront whatever this dark force was, even if it meant confronting the darkness within herself. The city felt more suffocating with each passing day. Emily could feel it in the air, the heaviness of something unseen, something far more dangerous than the rotting bodies of the undead. The very fabric of humanity seemed to be tearing apart, replaced by a fear that choked every thought, every action. The kind of fear that wasn't just about survival, but about losing who you were, what you were meant to be. The woman's warning haunted her thoughts. "They know what you've done." The words echoed like a riddle, but no matter how hard she tried to understand, they only led her deeper into uncertainty. What had she done? What could she possibly have done to attract such attention from these masked figures? Her gaze drifted down to the tattered remains of her clothes, the dirt and blood staining her skin. She had survived, yes. But at what cost? She had done things to survive that she never would have imagined before the outbreak. Betrayal, deception, even violence, it had all become necessary, normal in a world where every decision felt like a matter of life or death. The masked figures. Were they the true monsters, or was the real terror the need to constantly wear a mask of survival, a mask that shielded the remnants of humanity she was desperately clinging to? A low growl interrupted her thoughts, pulling her back to the harsh reality of the world around her. Her hand instinctively went to her knife, the steel cold against her palm, as she crouched down, moving silently through the wreckage of a collapsed building. She had learned long ago that silence was often the difference between life and death. The infected had their own particular brand of chaos, but the real danger was in the quiet. That was when things could sneak up on you, the real predators, the ones who stalked in the shadows. A sudden movement caught her eye. She froze, her body tensing as a figure emerged from behind a crumbled pillar. It was a man, unarmed, his face obscured by a tattered scarf. The way he moved was methodical, calculated, and though he didn't seem hostile at first glance, Emily knew better than to trust anyone too easily. The man stopped, sensing her presence before she had even moved. His gaze swept the area slowly, pausing when it landed on her. He didn't seem surprised to see her, there was something almost familiar in his eyes, a shared understanding of the danger they both faced. "Don't worry," the man said, his voice calm, almost too calm for the chaos around them. "I'm not here to hurt you." Emily didn't lower her knife. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady but sharp. Every encounter now was a potential threat, and she wasn't going to make the mistake of trusting anyone too easily. The man regarded her for a long moment before he slowly lowered his scarf, revealing a face that was scarred, weary, but still undeniably human. His eyes were dark, clouded with something unreadable, guilt, fear, or maybe just exhaustion. "I'm someone who's seen what's coming," he said quietly, his gaze flicking over her shoulder toward the empty streets. Emily's grip on her knife loosened slightly. She had heard that phrase before, from the woman in the alley. "What's coming?" she asked, her voice tinged with both suspicion and curiosity. The man's eyes darted around once more, scanning the area as if expecting someone to jump out at them. "The end of what's left of us. The masks have already started slipping. They'll show you what's really behind them soon enough." Emily frowned. "What do you mean, the masks?" The man seemed to hesitate, as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke in a low, measured voice. "There's something more dangerous than the infected. People, survivors, who are hiding behind the masks of civility, morality, even sanity. They use fear to control others, manipulate, to get what they want. They aren't just survivors, they're something else." Emily's mind raced. "So, these masked figures, they're not just what they appear to be?" "Exactly," the man replied, his tone flat. "They're not just people trying to survive. They're people who have already crossed the line. They've become something worse. The infection isn't just biological anymore. It's psychological. It's how they think, how they manipulate the fear, how they break people down." Emily's stomach tightened. The more she heard, the more she realized how deep the horror ran. The infected might be mindless, driven only by hunger, but these masked figures, these people, were something far more dangerous. They used fear to break people, to shape them into something that could serve their needs. And in a world where fear was the only constant, no one was safe. What do they want? Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. She had to know more. She couldn't keep stumbling through this nightmare, not understanding what was truly happening around her. They want control, the man said simply. Power. They're building something, and you're part of it, whether you realize it or not. Emily's breath caught in her throat. How am I part of it? The man smiled grimly, though there was no humor in his eyes. You've already started to change. Everyone has. You're living in a world where trust is a luxury, where every decision, every step you take is influenced by fear. Fear controls you. And when it does, when you've crossed that line, you put on a mask. You become one of them. No, Emily said, shaking her head, the words tasting like ash on her tongue. I haven't. I'm not like them. You're already wearing your mask, just like the rest of us, the man said softly. We all are. That's what they want, people who've forgotten who they were before. People who've lost everything but their need to survive. And when the time comes, when the masks come off, there's nothing left to save. The weight of his words hit her hard, more than any blow from an infected ever could. She wasn't just fighting to stay alive anymore. She was fighting to hold on to herself, to remain human in a world that seemed hell-bent on stripping away every last shred of humanity. The man turned and began to walk away, his figure disappearing into the shadows of the crumbling city. The masks will fall, he called over his shoulder. And when they do, you'll see what's really left. Emily stood motionless, staring at the spot where he had been. The world had already changed. But now, she realized, the real test had just begun. The question wasn't just whether she could survive. It was whether she could keep her soul intact in a world that was slowly tearing itself apart. The days that followed felt like a blur to Emily. Each new encounter, each whispered warning from strangers only added to the ever-growing dread that gnawed at her from the inside. The man's words echoed in her mind, rattling her thoughts at night when the world grew still. You're already wearing your mask. The more she tried to shake the feeling, the more it clung to her like a second skin. Everywhere she looked, she saw the cracks in people's humanity, the way fear warped their actions, their eyes betraying their desperation. Survivors no longer felt like people, they were hollowed out, their spirits dimmed, their motives driven solely by the desire to escape the hell around them. She had started to wonder, if the infection spread through fear, how many of them were already infected in ways that were far worse than physical? What did it mean to be human now, in a world where survival was the only currency? It wasn't long before she encountered another survivor who seemed to embody the truth the man had warned her about. She found him in a dilapidated building near the outskirts of the city, scavenging through the remnants of old supplies. His name was Marcus, and at first glance, he seemed harmless enough, just another survivor trying to make it in this broken world. But there was something off about him. Something Emily couldn't quite put her finger on. At first, Marcus was cordial, friendly even, offering Emily a bottle of clean water and a few cans of beans he'd found. They exchanged stories, hers of how she had been surviving alone, his of how he had been part of a small group before things fell apart. As they spoke, though, Emily felt the hairs on the back of her neck prickle. His words seemed rehearsed, too careful, like he was holding back something he didn't want her to know. They sat in silence for a while, sharing a meal under the faint light that filtered through a cracked window. Emily could feel the weight of his gaze on her, like he was studying her, trying to see beyond her mask. You know, Marcus said after a while, his voice low and contemplative, people like us, we're all wearing masks. Even if we don't want to admit it. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know how he knew what she was thinking, but she instinctively reached for her knife, the blade cold against her palm. What do you mean? She asked, her voice tight. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile of someone who had long since stopped caring about pretending. It's simple, really. You can't survive this world without wearing a mask. Not the literal kind, of course, he added with a soft chuckle, but the kind that keeps your humanity in check. Keeps the fear from eating you alive. Emily narrowed her eyes. And what kind of mask do you wear, Marcus? He leaned back against the wall, folding his arms across his chest. The kind that makes people trust me. The kind that makes them believe I'm just another survivor, like them. But inside, I know the truth. The truth is, we're all just playing a game. We pretend we're good, we pretend we're moral, but when it comes down to it, we'll do whatever it takes to survive. Her grip tightened on the knife. So, what does that make you? A predator? Marcus didn't flinch. No, just a realist. A predator is someone who takes what they want without thinking of the consequences. I'm just someone who knows that when the masks fall, only the strong will survive. The weak will be consumed by their own fear. And you, Emily, you're already starting to understand that, aren't you? A chill ran down her spine. How did he know my name? Marcus's eyes flickered briefly, as though reading her thoughts. I've been watching you, he admitted quietly, for a while now. You're not the only one trying to survive this world. There are others, people like me, who see what's really happening. We know that fear isn't just a tool for survival. It's the key to power. It's what separates us from the weak. The ones who cling to their humanity are just waiting to be consumed by it. Emily felt her pulse quicken as a realization dawned on her. He's one of them, the ones who hide behind the masks. She couldn't tell if he was just another survivor or something far more dangerous, but the way he spoke, the way he seemed to know exactly what she was thinking, it terrified her. Why are you telling me this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus shrugged nonchalantly, though his gaze never wavered from her. Because you need to understand. You can't keep running from the truth. Not forever. The masks we wear will eventually slip. You're already starting to see the cracks. It's only a matter of time before they break wide open. Before Emily could respond, the building shook with the sound of distant gunfire. The low rumble of chaos had begun, signaling another wave of danger approaching. The infected were closing in. She could hear their guttural growls in the distance, the eerie, relentless sounds of the undead. But now, there was something else, the unmistakable sound of voices, shouting, commanding. Marcus's expression darkened. They're here, he muttered, his voice colder now. And they've found us. Emily stood up quickly, her heart pounding. There was no time to waste. But as she glanced back at Marcus, she saw the flicker of something sinister, in his eyes. He wasn't just preparing to fight. He was preparing to control. Stay close, Emily, he said with a smirk. You'll see how the masks fall soon enough. A cold shiver ran down her spine as she realized that this man wasn't just a survivor. He was part of the growing force that used fear as their weapon, their tool to manipulate and control the broken world around them. He wasn't here to help. He was here to bring her into their world. As the building around them began to collapse under the weight of the chaos outside, Emily understood. The real battle wasn't with the infected, or even the survivors struggling to hold on to their humanity. The real battle was against the fear that hid behind the masks of the living, and the ones who would stop at nothing to ensure that fear ruled them all. The storm of gunfire raged outside, the sound reverberating through the crumbling walls of the building. Emily's senses were on high alert, her grip tight on the knife as she instinctively moved to the window. The streets below were in chaos. A group of survivors, their faces obscured by the same tattered scarves and homemade masks, were firing indiscriminately into the crowd of infected that surged forward. Their aim was precise, controlled, too controlled. Marcus stood a few feet behind her, watching the scene with an unnerving calm. They never learn, he muttered, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the madness. The infected aren't the real threat anymore. The real danger is the people who think they're in control. Emily couldn't tear her eyes away from the chaos. The survivors were ruthless, methodical in their execution of the infected. But something was wrong, She could see the coldness in their eyes, the way they moved with a sense of entitlement, as if the infected were nothing more than obstacles to be cleared out of the way. She had seen this before, this detached cruelty. "They're not just fighting to survive," Emily said quietly, more to herself than to Marcus. "They're enjoying it." Marcus didn't respond right away. His expression remained unreadable as he watched the survivors' calculated movements, as if evaluating their every action. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "You're starting to see it, aren't you? They've gone beyond survival. They've embraced the fear. They've learned how to control it, how to use it to bend the world to their will." A chill ran through Emily. She had seen this kind of behavior before, the cold efficiency, the disregard for life. But these weren't just mindless killers. They were people who had decided that the world could no longer be saved. And they weren't interested in rebuilding it, they were interested in taking what they wanted. The infected were nothing but an excuse, a convenient target. What happens to people like them? Emily asked, her voice trembling slightly as she processed the realization. When they're done with the infected, who do they turn on next? Marcus's eyes flickered, a dark gleam in them. "You don't want to know, Emily. Trust me. They'll start turning on each other. The masks will start slipping, just like they always do. And when that happens, the real monsters will be the ones who are still hiding behind the mask of survival." The words sent a shiver through Emily, but it was the truth she had been running from, the truth she had feared. In a world like this, survival was no longer just about avoiding the infected. It was about avoiding becoming like them, the masked figures, those who had long since discarded their humanity in exchange for power and control. Marcus took a step closer to her, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The only thing that matters now is who controls the fear. Fear is the weapon. Fear is the mask. And once it falls, everything else follows." Emily's mind reeled as she tried to make sense of his words. She had thought the infected were the only threat. But now she understood that the real battle wasn't against the undead, it was against the fear that the living had learned to wield like a weapon. A crash from the door behind them shattered the tense silence. The building shook as a group of armed survivors stormed in, their faces obscured by the same dark masks. They moved quickly, efficiently, sweeping the area with military precision. It was clear they had done this before, far too many times. One of them, a tall man with a long scar across his face, looked directly at Marcus. "We need to move. It's time," he said in a cold, commanding tone. Marcus nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I know," he replied, turning to Emily. "We need to go. There's no more time to waste." Emily's heart raced. There was something deeply unsettling about the way the newcomers moved, something clinical, like a group of predators who had perfected the art of controlling fear. They weren't just here to survive. They were here to dominate. As the armed group gathered their supplies, Emily hesitated, her thoughts racing. What does Marcus want? She couldn't shake the feeling that he had been leading her into a trap, showing her the cracks in the world, but for his own gain. His words had become too pointed, too deliberate, as if he had known exactly what buttons to push to get her to question everything she thought she knew. "Marcus, what's going on?" Emily demanded, her voice sharp. "What do you want from me?" He turned back to face her, his eyes dark with an emotion she couldn't quite place. Was it pity, regret, or something more dangerous? "I'm not your enemy, Emily," he said quietly. "But you need to understand. They're not just out there fighting for control. They're preparing for something much worse. When the masks come off, everything will change." "But I don't want any part of it," she replied, stepping back, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and defiance. Marcus didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned to face the door, signaling to the others that it was time to leave. The tall man with the scar crossed the room and came to stand next to Emily, his gaze cold and calculating. "You have a choice," the man said, his voice flat. "You can join us, or you can run. But running won't do you any good. The world is too far gone. We're the ones who know how to survive now." Emily took a step back, her thoughts spinning in every direction. Survive? At what cost? Her instincts screamed at her to run, to leave, to escape. But where could she go? The infected were everywhere. And these masked figures, they weren't just threats, they were shaping the world, molding it into something far darker than she had ever imagined. Take a good look at what's left of the world, Emily, Marcus said, his voice almost a whisper. You'll see that survival isn't about being human anymore. It's about control. And once you learn to control fear, there's nothing you can't do. The words hung in the air as Emily stood frozen, caught between the horrors of what she had witnessed and the looming reality of a world where the true monsters were the ones still wearing masks. The sound of the approaching chaos outside reverberated through the building, growing louder with each passing second. Emily's heart hammered in her chest as she stood frozen, caught between the decision to join Marcus and his group, or to flee into the unknown, where danger awaited in every shadow. The tall man with the scarred face stood too close, his piercing eyes scanning her every movement, weighing her every thought. Make your choice, he said coldly, his voice devoid of any real emotion. Stay with us, or leave. It's that simple. Emily's eyes flickered between Marcus and the other survivors in the room. Their faces, all hidden behind worn, fabric masks, had become nothing more than hollow shells to her. How much of what they presented to the world was real? How much of it was just a mask, a defense against the horror they'd all endured? She could hear Marcus's voice, soft but insistent, just behind her. The world you knew is gone, Emily. The only thing left is survival. If you leave now, you'll be just like the others, lost, desperate, alone. We're not the enemy. We're the future. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating her with their meaning. Survival, or something else. She couldn't quite bring herself to believe him. This wasn't the world she had imagined when she'd first left the shelter, the world she had hoped to rebuild. This wasn't the world she wanted to fight for. The thought of joining them twisted something deep within her. The fear, the power, the control, it all seemed so hollow, so wrong. She had heard Marcus, heard the others around her, but in the end, what they were offering her was not freedom. It was a new kind of prison, one where the masks were the only thing separating them from the monsters they had become. Her mind swirled with conflicting emotions. She had seen the worst of humanity, the greed, the cruelty, the desperation, but she had also seen sparks of hope, moments where people, despite everything, still tried to hold on to their humanity, even if only for a fleeting second. She remembered the children she had saved in the ruined suburbs, the faces of strangers who had offered her a hand when she had nothing to give. A flicker of defiance burned in her chest. She wasn't ready to let that go, not yet. She couldn't become like them, couldn't hide behind a mask just to survive. Humanity, real humanity, was worth fighting for, even if it meant standing alone. I'm not joining you, Emily finally said, her voice steady but resolute. And I'm not staying. The tall man's eyes narrowed, and a dark smile tugged at the corners of his lips. You'll regret this, you know. Once you see what's out there, once you see what we've built, you'll wish you had joined us. Marcus's expression flickered briefly with something that might have been regret, or was it pity? Don't make a mistake, Emily. Fear can only control you if you let it. And you're already starting to see how much it controls you. But I'll give you this warning, out there, it's not the infected you should fear. It's the ones who've already stopped pretending to be human. The words stung, but Emily didn't flinch. She had already made her decision. She turned away from the group and walked toward the door, her steps steady and sure. The tall man didn't stop her, but there was a malicious gleam in his eyes as he turned back to Marcus. A silent understanding passed between them. Emily had chosen her path, and they would let her go. For now. As she stepped into the cold, abandoned streets, the sounds of gunfire and the distant roars of the infected seemed to echo in her ears. The world outside was as broken as it had ever been, the chaos and violence continuing unabated. But something in her had shifted. She wasn't running anymore, she was choosing. She wasn't just fighting to survive, she was fighting for something more. Something that wasn't buried beneath layers of fear and masks. The streets were littered with the aftermath of the battle, remnants of the world that once was. Sheltered by the ruins of buildings, Emily felt the weight of every choice she had made, every path that had led her to this moment. She could hear the faint sounds of the infected shuffling in the distance, their moans a constant reminder of the world she now inhabited. But now, she understood. The true monsters weren't the ones shambling through the streets, their broken bodies barely recognizable. The true monsters were the ones who had given up on humanity, the ones who wore fear like armor and twisted it into a weapon. The ones who had decided that survival was more important than compassion, that power was more important than the fragile hope that still flickered in the hearts of those who refused to give in. Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself against the gusts of wind that whipped through the empty streets. She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her, but she wasn't going to let it crush her. She wasn't going to let the fear control her. Not anymore. This was her choice, and it was the only one that mattered. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay. The world outside was waiting for her, and it was time to face whatever came next, head on, with no mask to hide behind. The true test of humanity wasn't in the bloodshed or the survival tactics. It was in the moments when everything was lost, when fear threatened to tear apart what little was left of the world. It was in the choice to hold on, to fight for the light even when the darkness seemed endless. And Emily was ready to fight.